past cannot be changed. The future is yet in your power. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is navigating potholes on the road to development. We'll be covering areas such as the state of the economy, state of the country's politics, as well as the state of your future. What will happen in the next few months? We'll have to wait and see. However, we have invited several guest speakers tonight on our show as well. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us this evening are Malinda Seniratna, author and political commentator. Nice to have you on board, Malinda. Also joining us tonight on the show is Ramal Jalsingh, Chairman, National Chamber of Exporters. Nice to have you on board as well, Ramal. All joining us after a lapse of many months is a well-renowned vocalist on Sri Lanka's political as well as economic scenario, Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Nice to have you on board as well, Dr. Vijayawardena. Also joining us tonight on the show is Dr. Nirmal Ranjit Devasiri, lecturer at the University of Colombo. Nice to have you on board as well, Dr. Devasiri. Let's start off tonight's show with Malinda Seniratna, author and political commentator. Malinda, what's happening right now? Where are we really heading? And is there any glimmer of hope for Sri Lankans?
Well, I'm an optimist and I like to think that things will not always be bad. We have had bad situations, we have had worse situations, and I am not a doomsday prophet, and I think that if people come together, if there's a sense of solidarity and purpose, things can turn around. Sometimes because of the political leadership, sometimes in spite of the political leadership. But if we are going to talk about potholes on the road to development, I think that perhaps we should flesh out what development really is, what is the outcome that we want. Now sometimes outcomes are we give preference to certain things. For the last few years we've been talking about good governance, that is the most important outcome that we need to obtain. Then of course there is always the issues of the stomach, and therefore we talk about economic factors, and sometimes it is we have all kinds of theories and definitions of development. Sometimes it's about growth, sometimes it's about industrialization, now it's about technology, nanotechnology and things like that. But then do we also talk about the health of the planet, the health of the citizenry, the well-being of the general public, and the recent the term that has come into vogue recently, the happiness index. Are we really happy? We might have all the riches that we want, but are we really happy? Those are.
But is there good governance, Malinda? Because even today we just saw this story about DIG of the TID, Nalaka De Silva, temporarily transferred to the IT section of the police department. This is after the expose that was made at a media briefing. Are we having at least good governance in Sri Lanka at present?
Well, if you look at the social media and the discussions that happen there, it has come to a point where we are discussing relative merits, where some people are saying at least we have this, at least we don't have that, it is better than what it was. But that was not the kind of scenario that people would have aspired to when January 8th, 2015 happened. So in that sense, I'm sure that there's a lot of disappointment. And part of it is the fact that we have a political culture where we elect people who don't have a really good track record. We keep switching horses and bad horses, and then we complain that these guys are not delivering. But why I did not see great reasons for hope in 2015 January because of the personalities that led that what Nirmal calls a low intensity revolution. I don't think he uses that term now, yeah. But let us be realistic. How much can we expect from these people?
You say, Malinda, about switching horses. Are we switching horses or are we betting on the wrong horse?
Well, we don't
what
have
exactly
to,
is happening?
How many horses do we have to bet on, right? And we as a citizenry, we also have to share the blame. We are not looking at alternatives, are we? We are saying, okay, these guys or those guys, we throw them out, we get these guys in. We throw these people out, we get those guys. I have been saying this, that the person and who contributed most to Maithripala Sirisena's victory was Mahinda Rajapaksa. Because all the things that happened paved the way for Sirisena to come to power. And I feel now that the Yahapalana regime is returning the favor.
Thank you very much, Malan Senaratna, author and political commentator. I now move my attention to Ramal Jasingha, Chairman, National Chamber of Exporters. Ramal, let's talk about the country's economy, where it stands at present, because this affects your area of expertise. Today we saw the rupee further depreciating against the US dollar. Now stands at 165 rupees and 14 cents. Today, last week we said it was 164 rupees. Today, 1 rupee and 14 cents up. What's happening?
Actually, it's a very interesting question, because it was just on Friday that I was on the panel at the Economic Forum, National Economic Forum, conducted by the Ceylon Chamber. And my view was that with the rupee bungee jumping, if you can call it that, and changing.
Did you say monkey jumping?
Bungee jumping.
Bungee jumping.
it seems to be going low, right?
Right.
And okay, it may not make sense in the parlance of an open economy, but what I was advocating, at least for the short term, it's about time the central bank intervened, because they are virtually determined not to intervene, because if you don't apply the brakes somewhere, the entire business effort is going to backfire. So having said that, at tea time I was accosted by a lady who said, shouldn't you all be happy as exporters that the rupee is depreciating so fast? Then I said, look, it's depreciating a little too fast, because what you don't understand, that almost 97% of our inputs are imported. And then our cost of production and cost of being competitive is compromised. And then we cannot compete effectively against competitors who have larger scale. Maybe the rupee is not depreciating as fast as some other relative currencies. I think we are about 6% against the Indian rupee having 11%. But again, the parity is not there, if I using the correct term.
Leave alone bungee jumping, Ramal, at least there needs to be a stop to this monkey business with the country's economy, at least now. Where are we really heading in the next few months as far as the Sri Lankan rupee against the US dollar is concerned? Are we looking at around 175 by the end of this year?
I would reckon so, if it goes on like this. But that is why I say, now in the past, there was intervention, and I don't advocate it. But there is a limit to which our economy can take the free fall.
But if we don't have the reserves to support this, then what are we supposed to do?
Well, the other alternative is increased production, but it's a double-edged sword now, or it's a vicious cycle. Like, how would you increase your production when your inputs are costing you so much? And also don't forget, we have the issues of skilled labor shortage. We have so many issues. As I said at the panel, the business of exports is not easy. But having said that, we have seen month-over-month growth on exports, but it's still not sufficient to offset the import bill. So we need some sort of governmental help, or at least the central bank intervening, at least for the short term. Apply the brakes and then get your fundamentals right.
The former finance minister keeps criticizing the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for its conduct. And you seem to be also of the opinion that the central bank should do more at present. So are you trying to say the central bank is not doing their job, or are you trying to say that the central bank has to really gear up and look at the future much more formidably? What is your take?
Asking me?
Are you saying that the central bank is not doing their job, or are you saying that there is more that needs to be done, because the former finance minister has been criticizing the conduct of the central bank officials on many fora? Where are you standing, Rama?
No, I must say, in fairness to central bank, they try to stick by the fundamentals, and having said that, I think we've come a long way. Dr. Vijayawardena might also agree with me. For example, they have been talking about a concept of flexible inflation targeting, which is probably a more prudent way of managing the inflation. And having said that, our inflation, I still think, is within control. I think right now it stands between 5 and 3%. So with all the difficulties, people can still live. And I mean, this is an interesting question because at that forum, my mind went back to the time when we were growing up in the 70s, where we had severe hardships in terms of essentials. But I stand to be corrected. The country's fiscal situation or its international debt situation had been sorted out at that time, where despite the austerity we had, and though we didn't see the results of it, the country was, I think, less debt-ridden. There were less projects and less development. It was a closed economy and a very controlled economy. So you can't compare, it's not like with like. But my take is you're going through a tough time right now. And I think the central bank, in fairness to them, is doing an excellent job. Just that in this aspect of letting the rupee go on to a free fall, I think they should at least look at it.
Thank you very much, Ramal Jalsingan, Chairman of the National Chamber of Exporters. Because Ramal spoke about the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, I want to move my attention to the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of the country, Dr. W. Vijayawardena. Dr. Vijayawardena, coming on the show after a few months, where were you? Missing in action or?
Well, I was pretty much available, but not here.
Not here.
Yeah.
Dr. Vijayawardena, you make a very interesting remark at a recent event organized by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka itself. You say that, in my view, the wife should be a smart wife and not merely a good wife. And then you go on to say that this is because a good wife, having accommodated the demands of the husband, may run the risk of being pregnant every year, whereas a smart wife could at least have a gap between pregnancies. Now I'm trying to figure out who is the good wife and who is the bad wife. Is it the government or the central bank, or is it the people who's always being the brunt or always becoming pregnant as a result of bad governance?
No, Samir, the husband is the government. Okay, we can say it's the Minister of Finance, who was the central bank to print money loosely. And if the and central bank is the wife. And if the wife accommodates that request every time the minister makes the request, result is, as Ramal has said, we will end up with high inflation, the depreciation of the currency, macroeconomic instability, and all the economic problems that we are facing. Is the root cause of that is that particular accommodation of the minister's, the husband's wish. So if you are a smart wife, at least you know how to control the husband. And as a result, you may be able to moderate the inflation in the country, and during that particular period, you may be able to introduce the fundamental economic.
It is in light of this statement that we hear that the public debt division of the central bank is going to be coming under the Ministry of Finance. Now, Dr. Vijayawardena, you may say that this is a good move. However, coming directly under the Ministry of Finance, is this the way to go about?
No, it's actually, I think the media had reported only half the story, Shamir.
Yes.
Because the central bank, as Ramal had said, is going to introduce a new kind of a monetary policy platform from January next year, which is called flexible inflation targeting. So in the flexible inflation targeting, the central bank would be controlling the rate of interest in order to maintain inflation at the targeted level, which is around 4 to 5% for Sri Lanka. When it does so, and if it handles the public debt, there's a conflict of interest, because the central bank is required to raise the funds for the government at the cheapest cost if it handles the public debt. But at the same time, when the central bank has to maintain the inflation at this targeted level of 4 to 5%, then it may have to increase the interest rates. So because of this conflict of interest, it is always better that the public debt function should be taken away from the central bank, but it's not the Ministry of Finance which it should be seated. It has to be under a different independent national debt office. For that purpose, the government will have to introduce a new legislation, and in that new legislation they have to provide for the new debt office to assure the investors in public debt that their monies are safe, and also when the interest are due to be paid and the principal is to be repaid, the debt office will have to take full responsibility for that. And unless you give that particular assurance to investors, if it is happening under the Ministry of Finance, then there is no assurance for the investors to make investments in the
Dr.
public.
Vijayawardena, can I safely say that you are suggesting that even the cabinet of ministers should not be responsible for the actions of the public debt department of the central
No,
bank?
I mean the debt officers in other countries where they have been taken away from the central bank, like in Sweden, they are fully independent even from the government, Samir, because the reason is this. Now, these are sovereign debt. When one government borrows from the members of the public and also from foreigners, since it's a sovereign debt, the successive governments are bound to honor the debt that has been contracted by the previous government. But if a particular finance minister, maybe he's a stupid fellow, and if he makes the announcement, I am not going to repay any of the public debt that has been raised by the previous government, then the country will lose its credibility. So because of this reason, the national debt officers are independent from the government and from the cabinet of ministers, and it should be a separate office, separately empowered by a new legislation, and that new legislation should be as good as the current Monetary Act under which the central bank is operating.
You're talking about stupid finance ministers in the future, or are you talking about stupid finance ministers in the past?
It can happen. I mean, we cannot guarantee what kind of a person would be the next finance minister in the country.
Dr. Vijayawardena, very quickly before I move to Dr. Devasri, you were featured on this very same show with Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, who is currently a sitting Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. I recollect when you said several months after, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is going to have a tough time in protecting the country's currency. Dr. Veerasinghe was not in favor of that statement. He said things are going to be better, let's be optimistic. Seems like you are right and he was wrong. What's going to happen in the next few months?
Well, of course, if you
Dr.
go
Vijayawardena?
by the fundamentals in Sri Lanka's economy, Samir, we have to repay the public debt that is actually maturing in the next 12-month period, and also we have to pay interest. And because in the case of Sri Lanka, our total government debt is about 35 billion US dollars. In addition to that, the private sector also has borrowed about 20 billion. So the total external debt of the country is about 55 billion, and the annual debt repayment comes to about, say, 6.5 billion in the next 12-month period, and the total free reserve that we are having is about 6.7 billion. So we are actually in a very critical situation.
Thank you
so
very
as
much.
a result, unless we get foreign funding from somewhere else, we are not in a position to protect the Sri Lanka rupee.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Vijayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. He's also a senior economist joining us on the show as usual. It's always nice to have you on board, Dr. Vijayawardena. I now move my attention to Dr. Nirmal Ranjit Devasri, a lecturer at the University of Colombo. From governance, from Malinda, from the rupee, from Ramal, Dr. Vijayawardena spoke about the country's economy, and I want to talk to you about the country's political arena at present. The only thing it seems as the government has been successful to do over the last few weeks is changing the supply of cashew nuts in the national carrier. What are your thoughts about the way in which the country's governance structure is taking place, as well as the state of the country's political future? The time starts now.
Yeah, well, so I'm not as optimist as the Malin there. And I mean, you made a very interesting remark at the beginning of your introduction, and you said that the history cannot be changed. Well, I'm my academically, my training was history, because history may not be able to change, but the way we how we look at history can be changed. So I think, and Malind also referred to my characterization of what happened in January 8, 2015. So I think I'm more than convinced again that my characterization is correct, but because that is what is happening in governance is partly due to the kind of change that happened in January 2015, because the expectation were too high, right? So that's what all about the revolution. I mean, you might have seen this the famous the Peter Weiss's play, Marasad, the where Sad, was very pessimistic about the the revolution and so on, and say that refer to the high expectation of the people who were behind the revolutionary process, and so then ability of the rulers to to deliver. So you have that gap. So this crisis is partly due to the due to this massive gap between the expectation and the ability, and also it is we can ask the question whether this expectation can be met at least in the the short or the medium term, right? So I think I would like to I'm not an economist, but perhaps it is in the age that we are living, it is better not to be an economist, because the task of the economist is extremely difficult, because the most of the problems that we are facing cannot be easily addressed, and actually maybe few decades ago, I would say before 75, right, maybe we had a situation where the economy was in the hand of policymakers to a certain extent.
Dr. Devsri, let's talk about this revolution that you supported once prior to January 8th, the presidential poll. You were a staunch supporter of change and good governance in Sri Lanka. 3.5 years down the line, just a few more months to go for the 4th year to complete. Are you satisfied?
No, well, actually, I didn't expect anything. So that, as far as, I'm concerned. So what I would say that I would have done the same, if I had to do it again, because,
so you will say you will support the same regime, or
no?
I
didn't support a regime, and I didn't.
You supported the silent revolution or the butterfly revolution.
Well, listen.
Spoke of.
So there are two ways. There are the two ways to look at your engagement with this kind of situation. One is to the positive way. So that means that you are expecting something good to happen, right? And other thing is that to get rid of something, and right. So so now actually amidst all these things that we can be critical about, and so there now there is a kind of a new opening, right? And the politics is open, right? And also the economic also, I think even our discussion of the economy should be elevated to a level from the immediate concerns. So I think when you look at the economic situation we are in, I don't think that any intelligent the economists can do anything to change the situation in the short term or even medium term. So these the economics problem, most of the economic problems that we are facing are part of the general economic state of the
so
world.
Let's say, Dr. Let's make it very simple. Let's say there is an election in 2 years' time on the 8th of January 2020.
Yeah.
You spoke about three things. You spoke about you vote for a positive change.
No, I didn't. I didn't vote for
you said three things. You said positive change, and then you said you can also vote to get rid of people, and then you spoke about everything is open now, including the country's economy as well as politics. So if it came to this point, 2020 presidential poll, what would you vote for? Is it positive change, getting rid of people?
I don't
or
think
is
that
it,
I don't think that I would support any of the major political camps. loans, right?
Thank you very much, Dr. Devshree. Let's open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate left is Nadim Majid. On to my far left is Chaturanga Hapuraj. Missing Sonali Vanagabatke today. She's sick and in hospital. I hope and pray she gets well soon. Let's start off tonight's show with Chaturanga.
Thank you, Sham. My first question is to Dr. Vijayawardena. Now, Dr. Vijayawardena, in the recent past, when it comes to the economy of the country, a lot of people spoke about certain directors obtaining loans, certain depositors not receiving the required money from private institutions, so on and so forth. Now, at least as per the law, there is a Finance and Banking Commission in our country. But how important is it now with everything that is coming to light in terms of these two examples that I raised and examples in the past as well, to re-establish or revisit this Banking and Finance Commission of our country?
About this loan raised by the particular director in a state bank, Chaturanga, the central bank has issued the instructions to all the banking institutions how they should accommodate requests coming from directors and their close relatives and also senior officers, and banks are supposed to follow those guidelines. In terms of those guidelines, the director will have to declare that he has an interest. He should not participate in any of the board meetings which might decide on the particular loan. He should not intervene in the normal credit assessment process in the bank, and all these guidelines have to be followed by the particular institution. Now, many think that it's the duty of the central bank to either to prevent the granting of such loans or either to accommodate in such loans, but that's not the case, because the central bank is supposed to regulate the banking sector, not the individual banks.
Yeah.
And central bank is not expected to do micromanagement in commercial bank, because if the central bank does so, eventually what would happen is the particular bank might start blaming the central bank for giving them wrong directions, and as a result they have become bankrupt and they might blame the central bank on their own bankruptcy. So because of this reason, what the central bank do right now is whether the particular bank has followed the correct procedure and whether it has followed the guidelines issued by central bank, and if it is so, whether the loan is a performing loan. Now, what I have learned from the statement made by the bank is that, not the central bank, the particular bank, is that it's a performing loan and therefore there is no any risk to the depositor's money. The request about the money and banking commission, there is no such commission has been appointed, Chaturanga, so far. There's a request for such a commission, but of course I know we had a similar commission in 1990 also, and I was also one of the part of that particular commission as a technical advisor, and we produced 12 reports, and all the 12 reports are shelved. I don't know where they are now. All the recommendations that we made, nobody took serious notice of the recommendations made, and as a result it was just an academic exercise at the cost of the taxpayers. Even in the future, if we appoint a similar commission, it might take 5 or 6 years time for the commission to come up with the report, and there is no guarantee that the recommendations made by the commission would be implemented. So therefore I don't think that is the most critical issue in the country's banking system today.
But then, Dr. Vijayawardena, the other side of the question is, now, yes, matters like this come to light. There are white collar crimes, if I may call it that, happening, and who is to look and say, if it is not the central bank who has to go into the micromanage the banking sector, then who has to do that job?
That job has to be done by the board of directors of the particular bank, and they have to take the responsibility, because in my view, even if there is no any violation of the guidelines given by the central bank, in my view the particular director would not have asked for that particular loan from the bank where he has been serving as a director. There is a kind of immoral practice that has been done.
Definitely.
So therefore it shouldn't have been done in my view.
In terms of that particular example, once again, now when you take a look at a bank, a state bank of that nature, why would a state bank take a decision to go and invest in debentures in a company like the company that we are referring to? But And once again, if it's the board that's taking the decision to do that, if the board takes a wrong decision, is there a mechanism to find and penalize them, or does that go?
No, I
just
mean,
like
if
that?
it is a wrong decision, as I have mentioned, Chaturanga, central bank can always take action against the particular board of directors. Right now, as it is, I don't think it's a performing loan, and therefore there is no reason for anyone to be alarmed. But even in that case, the correct system would have been that the board should not have granted such a huge loan to one of its own directors.
But doctor, when we first reported on the matter, one day before we reported on this particular subject, the loan was a non-performing loan, and it was transferred to a performing loan after the report was
That's totally
released.
wrong, Chaturanga. It's totally wrong. If it has been done, I think the depositors, members of the public, members of parliament, all have a right to ask this particular question from the bank, how it was converted to a performing loan overnight. It is completely wrong.
Mr. Senaviratna, question to you as well. Now, when we take a look at the economy of the country, yes, it goes hand in hand in the politics of the country. Now, all of a sudden, we see the government, when it was in the opposition, blamed the former government, saying, look, you're looking at China all the time, the infrastructure development is carried out by China, people are being brought down from China. China was the main slogan. And then now, when things are moving forward 3 years into the government as well as the opposition is now looking at India, and China is on the side. Now this comes in a backdrop where article was published by New York Times to say that Chinese money was given for the former president's election campaign. So if you connect the dots and see where this is going, in your opinion, are we just saying working according to the tune of the Indians, because that's what it looks like? India comes and says, yes, there is this file that is there about your Chinese loan, so come work with us and we'll be fine with you.
I don't trust politicians too much. It's easy to say nice things. I mean, even countries, why should we trust countries? Countries don't have to be, they will say we are friends, we are a friendly nation, we are good neighbors, and we have such a long common history and all that. But countries, like people and like companies, will pursue their self-interest, and they will make the nice sounding statements for the media and general public consumption. But what really happens under all that, we really don't know. Sometimes it's an outcome that we look at and we say, okay, this is why that was said at that point by that person. So now India is being talked of. What can India do, right? China is not only talked of, China is in your face. It's like all over the place. We wonder whether we have a face anymore, right? Whether it's good or bad, that's a different matter. So the Indian factor against the Chinese factor. India is a huge market. I think these gentlemen will know how big is Sri Lanka in comparison to India. What would China want? Better relations with India or with Sri Lanka? They are not going to mess up their relations with India just because of some one particular advantage that we have, which is a strategic interest. Yeah. And we are talking a lot about India just because Mahinda Rajapaksa went and met the former Prime Minister of India, and
he also met with the current Prime Minister and the President and the former President, and the Prime Minister of our country is due to go to India on the 19th of this month, 2 days time. And a parliamentary delegation of the current parliament was in India, met with the former president, the current president and the current prime minister. So yes, I think there is a requirement to speak about the...
Sometimes you can have all those meetings with a lot of people and you say, okay, it's all India, Sri Lanka, right? But then one person can have a small chat over the telephone with China, right? So we really don't know. Usually when there's an election going to happen, right? Now we are like how many months? 3 months away from 2019, which is an election year, right? People go and talk with India.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah, of course, you can intervene.
Do you really think that this meeting is sort of irrelevant and it's a non-event?
To the extent that we are all talking about it, it is of course relevant, right? But what is the magnitude
No,
of that relevance?
don't you think that it's a kind of it's a kind of turning point?
Nirmal, we listen to this whole thing about geopolitical, Bhudesha Palana Yathartha, geopolitical realities when people of your tribe, the left tribe, were trying to sell us the Indo-Lanka Accord, right?
No, I'm not talking about
let me finish
geopolitics.
also,
Yeah,
let me
yeah.
finish. So, this Indian factor and the Chinese factor, the magnitude of that factor is gets varied. It's
Malinda, the simple reality of the fact is was reported in an article yesterday, if I'm recalling it correctly, of a project, RDA road rehabilitation project in the east, in the Sunday Times newspaper, if I'm right. So a few days after this India matter comes into light, the High Commission puts a request, sends to a request to give the RDA road rehabilitation projects of the East, which has already been selected to be given to a Chinese company, to an Indian company. The employees will be provided by India, and the Prime Minister's ministry is going to forward a cabinet memorandum, I think, for the next cabinet meeting. So the shift is almost immediate. China is there, yes, they have been carrying out infrastructure projects because of the former president and the relationship he had, and all of a sudden we see a parliamentary delegation going to India. Not even 1 week later, we see projects being removed by China and given to India. So there is relevance.
Right. None of these are not, I'm not saying none of them are irrelevant, right? I'm just questioning the importance that we attach to these things that are happening. The bottom line, I think, will be bucks. Money, right? You can make all the noises you like, we'll do this. India has promised us a lot. I remember Partly Champika Ranavaka once told me, this whole thing about India and Sampur and all that. Some of these projects have been signed, agreements signed, not once a bit of earth has been moved. Because India is such a complex country in terms of these processes unfolding. But in the end, this of course we'll have to see in the future, it will depend on who can actually deliver. We are talking about China, which is accused of having taken over Africa. We are talking about India, which has not taken over anyone.
Ramal, Malinda is saying that the bottom line comes down to the bucks, the big bucks, the money. Yeah. From a businessman's perspective, from the perspective of as the chairman of the National Chamber of Exporters, how do you view the magnitude or the relevance or irrelevance or over-attached or under-attached relevance of these meetings that politicians have globally?
One of the things I can state is that the exporters and all of us are fairly nervous about the FTAs that could arise out of these meetings, the free trade agreements. Now that could have an impact on our products and our export markets, because we are starting on a negative. We are starting on reduced scale, high power costs, high costs of production, and lack of skilled labor. Now, I think the discussion said that, there will be labor also provided by India. So now there's a lobby from our industrialists to allow to import labor, because it's out of sheer despair, because we can't run our factories or business, mainly factories, due to the lack of skilled labor. So with all this activity coming in, the business of exports would be that much more constrained. So it might solve a larger macroeconomic situation, as Dr. Vijayawardena said, in terms of money coming into the country, big bucks, and bringing about some stability, at least in the balance of payments and on our fiscal liabilities. That's a greater benefit. But on the ground, where we exporters are struggling to export and create markets and to maintain our market shares and also to be competitive on the back of the depreciating rupee, it is going to be challenging.
Now you have a government or a majority of those who are in government are supportive of the view that liberalization leads to progress and prosperity. And since we're talking about potholes on the road to development, they feel that this is the best way to navigate the potholes to development. How do you feel about that?
Well, if you take on the face of it, like a free trade agreement would give access, on theory at least, to a larger global market, and then we achieve inclusion into global trade with some advantages. The reality is that you probably have non-tariff barriers that are not spelled out. And also we have this so-called negative list, where you get the free flow of goods and the exchange of goods, where we look at some form of protection. Protection is not a very relevant word today, but okay, we are protected. So the point, we at the export chamber are talking of some hand-holding. Now we are not saying spoon feed us and protect us, which are done a couple of decades ago with probably closed economies. I'm sorry. But you got to realize that even in the EU, even to this date, there's as much as a 60% or 50% protection on agriculture goods. When they export, they are given subsidies and they are protected to some extent. So if that same facility given to our producers, be it services, be it particularly in agriculture.
Dr. Vijayawardena, do you agree with that assessment given by Mr. Jasinger?
Well, yeah, I mean, now mainly if you look at these factors, the exchange rate and all other factors, there are non-economic factors which are more important in Sri Lanka than the economic factors, because when it comes to productivity in Sri Lanka, it is not just the exchange rate that matters, but the presence of a skilled labor force, the technology, the ability, the logistical facilities within the country, the ability to do business, tax regimes, those are all non-economic factors. So main reason is that even if we depreciate the currency, even if we sign a free trade agreement with another country, we cannot expect miracles overnight, because those other constraints might
So what should be the gear that you should shift to go on this road?
No, it has to be done
if you're going
simultaneously. It has to be done simultaneously, because simply because you have signed a free trade agreement or you have allowed the exchange rate to depreciate in the market will not deliver miracles to us. Therefore, the government will have to do it on a simultaneous basis. All the factors that are necessary for us to put in the right place will have to be put in right place.
Dr. Devasri, very quickly, you said that you didn't have many expectations from the Yahapalnya government. However, your words and the campaigning at the time did raise expectations among the voting public. You said that you can change the way you perceive history, while you can't change history itself. A few years from now, how do you think the Sri Lankan people will perceive the era, or rather the interregnum of Yahapalnya?
No, I think, you even can see now, how the people perceive the present era. There is a, massive disillusionment and so the unhappiness, and the popularity of the government is going down.
For you, where has the government failed to deliver?
Well,
as far as you're concerned, in terms of your interest.
No, actually, from the very moment that they embark on their journey, and I don't think that they had a clear idea of the kind of transformation that occurred. And what happened was that the political change occurred in January 2015, not on the merits of those people who came to power, right? But on the basis of the certain
frustrations and expectations of the public.
Yeah, and also the negative experience of the previous government. So therefore, what they should have done is that they have to have a clearer idea.
Let me ask you a more specific question. What was your greatest expectation from Yahapalnya? You take the 100-day program, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, changing electoral systems. What was your greatest expectation?
I would have expected kind of more realistic and approach. Kind of the open dialogue with the people, right? And to seriously have a look at what was promised, and to engage in a constructive dialogue with the people, their ability to meet these expectations. Sometimes some expectations are not easy to meet, right? And what should have done is that, rather than just allowing things to happen, you can be happy about the kind of democratic the situation that relatively high level of the democratic freedom, but that's not enough. So that's the kind of that is not because of the what government has done, right? So that's a kind of that's happened automatically because of this change. But government.
So basically, in a nutshell, you were expecting a change in political culture, and that was not delivered. In a nutshell.
Well, I would approach in a different way. I would say that we are living in a very challenging time, right? So so you don't have no one has the set solutions, right? So you have to the public they have to allow the public to speak, right?
No, but the problem is, Dr. Devasri, most often than not, you say that the government should have an open dialogue with the people, but the problem is, many are saying that this government is too democratic.
No, I don't think that is too democratic, So that's because of, no, I think, this government is worst in the sense that, so they have,
worse in the sense that they introduce entire acts of parliament in committee
so there
stage.
is a very, how do you say, a small group of people with vested interest, right? So they are behind the scene. So they are not the people who are elected, and so they are running the business.
No, because
they are running the
I'm
show.
posing this question to you. Why?
That is the that's the most undemocratic thing.
Dr. Devasri, I'm posing this question to you. Why? Because when the joint opposition organized a protest march on the 5th of September, stating that they will raid government officers and make sure that Colombo gets defunct, this government said they will even give water to those who are coming to Colombo for the rally. But that was not the case with the previous regime. When people wanted water, they shot dead at least 2 or more people in Ratupaswala. So that is why I'm posing this question to you about being democratic and not being democratic.
No. It is not because of, so I don't think that, the present government is capable of doing, certain things that the previous government did, especially.
So there is no option of sliding back to the previous regime at any cost.
They can, so they can go against the demonstration organized by university students, but by the general public. So they are not capable of doing that because, so sometimes you have to look at the, the chemistry of the political bloc, right? So I think if they, if they crack on this kind of mass demonstration, so that would be sort of end of them.
No, because we hear statements from President Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was in India, stating that my son is just not 35 years old, so he's not going to be contesting the next election. However, there will be another Rajapaksa from the same family maybe contesting at the next election. Now I'm trying to figure out, Dr. Devasri, are you swinging somewhere close to that, or what is your position right now?
No. Well, I think as far as whatever the joint opposition or the Rajapaksa camp is concerned, I don't think that there is the non-Rajapaksa. There are going to be a non-Rajapaksa candidate. That's very unlikely.
So there's going to be a Rajapaksa candidate.
Yeah, certainly. I don't think that they can afford to have a non.
In the event there is a Rajapaksa candidate, would you be supporting that candidate, Dr. Devasri? Because you were a strong supporter of the January 8th, 2015
I don't
polls.
think that I would support, because my kind of political thinking is completely different from
Thank you very much, Dr. Devasri. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we're talking about the country's state of affairs. Are we on the right track? What's going to happen in the next few months? We are not going to have a magic ball in front of us to predict the future, but we are going to get some expert views as to where the country is heading. All this and more after a short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.